I don't think that we can necessarily have 100 nations sitting down and deciding regulatory policy either, because everybody is in a little bit different situation. But that's my hope for the new regulatory architecture, which would be tightening up bank and investment fund capital requirements in a counter-cyclical way.
Thank you. I just hope you all understand that temptation to take side with Dr. Mahathir's perspective is really there was a hell of a lot of very smart people getting it wrong at the same time, so you're kind of tempted to believe there's something a bit more than just that. Anyway, sorry, you've been standing for a long time.
Ms. Rafi Yusof, I'm from Islamic Development Bank, Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. First, allow me to respond quickly to the Islamic banking side. We are doing something at Islamic Development Bank to promote Islamic banking as a means to also combat this crisis as a whole. You cannot hear me? Okay. Let me just quickly come back to the Islamic banking idea about how this can be relevant. At Islamic Development Bank, we're doing something to gather all the Islamic bankers of the world to try and promote some way to regulate the Islamic financial crisis that's ongoing now. But let me just move on quickly to what I saw and observed from Tun Mahathir's presentation. I saw two root causes that you seem to describe to us. One, about money, and that has to be as an issue. Second is about banking institution. Third, on governance. And thirdly, on greed, of which Professor Engle promoted further through the volatility sort of model. And you have said that banking is money making money, and it appears that it is not a productive system, and the real economy is being neglected, while the banking sector seems to promote itself as an end. So if that's the case, should this global financial architecture be changed and relabeled as an economic architecture? If you look at the four principles of the root causes, then you want to look at it a whole differently. Maybe we should promote that it's not bankers, economists, and lawyers in Washington trying to describe the new financial architecture. We should have people like you, doctors and medical doctors, looking at the people issue and then resolve the financial crisis. So maybe if you can respond on the principles of which we should relook at this whole economy architecture. That's number one. Secondly, you didn't talk a little bit about the trade bloc, whether the trade bloc would be an effective mechanism for us to look at it as a whole when we look at the new economy architecture. Maybe to that as well, maybe Professor Engle, you have not talked about the trade bloc as in relation to the volatility market. Thank you.
Well, I really don't know how to respond to that, because I'm not a banker, so I don't know much about these things. But I do think that we should regulate banking practices and limit their ability to lend money to what they can actually service, and not just lend a lot of money. As far as I know, whenever you go to a bank to borrow money, they never say, we have finished our capital. They only say, we are not giving it to you. The assumption is that your proposal is not viable, so they will not lend money to you. But they apparently still have the money, but it's just that you are not good enough for their money. So how much money do the banks have? I don't know. They seem to have unlimited amount of money. I think there is a need to curb them a little bit. They can lend so much and not more than that. I think in Malaysia there is some control over banks, and because of that I think we shouldn't suffer that much. There's also some control over insurance companies. You may notice that whereas AIG in America suffered so badly, the American International Insurance here has not suffered that much. That's because they are not allowed to invest in certain things. So regulation is not bad, but over-regulation is bad. You must allow certain breathing space for these people to function. Otherwise, of course, we don't have any money to develop the country, because all the time money is increasing. I sometimes ask myself, where does the money come from? Is it that the bank is printing more money? But I suppose they have to print more money. But how much more? That is something that we never ask. Even as Prime Minister before, I couldn't get the governor of the bank to tell me how much money he has. So regulation is something that is apparently necessary now. But how much regulation? And the banking system also needs to be looked into, because I think the idea that banks can just make money out of thin air, that is not very healthy. The tendency for banks is that the more you lend, the more you are going to earn. And therefore, why not lend as much as possible? And then, of course, somebody says, why bother about the risk? We can insure the lending. So that kind of thinking, I think, we should curb. We should not allow them to so-called secure the loans, because really, as we have seen, they are not secured at all. As far as formation of trade blocs is concerned, I think either we have them or we don't have them. Presently, we have the European Union, we have NAFTA, but in the East, we are not allowed to have the EAEC. Then, of course, we become a very weak trade partner for the rest. We think that we should have the EAEC, or else disband the other trade blocs. Then I think the competition would be fair. At the same time, I still think that free trade just open to everyone, I think is not fair, because we don't have the same strength. Some people are much more powerful, have much more money, more technology than others. We say that you must allow borders to be open to everyone. Then I think the strong will go and take over what belongs to the weak. I had suggested the other day that if it is a borderless world, why not send 100 million Chinese to Europe and 200 million Indians to America, for example? Because there is no border, let them go. But this does not apply to migration of people. It applies only to migration of money. So again, it is a little bit one-sided. So I think trade blocs are good, but we must have trade blocs for all groups, not just Europe and North America. Thank you.
Sorry, Robert, do you want to comment on the trade blocs question?
I think that trade between nations is a very important way that everyone can gain. It improves the standard of living of both the buyer and the seller, and increases the scope of business that can be done. And so forming a trade bloc is a way of facilitating trade, at least within the nations in this bloc, and I think it certainly makes sense to do that. I think that whatever cooperation there is between neighbors is an advantage, and it will, if there is a trade bloc, it will make it easier to do joint ventures and business together. So I think it is worth exploring this. I don't see it so much as one trade bloc against another trade bloc. It seems to me we're all together in a great big trade bloc, but if it's easier to negotiate trade restrictions with your neighbors, then I think that's a reasonable place to start. I guess I also want to say something about this role that banks have. It seems to me banks play an extremely important role in the modern economy by lending money, both short run and long run, to businesses and individuals for investment and to carry out their ordinary functions. And there are risks that the bank takes by making these loans, and they need to monitor the loans and decide which risks they're willing to take and which risks they're not willing to take. Modern finance has, to some extent, let banks take these loans and stop monitoring them, but instead sell them to other investors. And this has both good and bad sides. It means you no longer do the monitoring, which is, I think, the problem that you're talking about. But it also means that the bank is not so risky because all its loans are in the same sector or in the same geographical area or the same type of business. So that I think there are benefits to the securitization of loans which will continue to be used and explored, and some of the modern developments will, I think that will survive this kind of financial crisis.
Thank you for that defense of banks. It's not true that we make money out of thin air and that we have unlimited money. But it's true that certainly regulation, and for that I think certainly the regulatory framework in Malaysia has been very good and should be a model globally actually. If you look at the leverage ratio of banks in Malaysia, we're about 10-11 times to capital. But UBS is at 55 to 60 times. So you see the huge discrepancy there. Sorry, would you like to ask?
Okay, my name is Ramzi Hamad. I'm an expat. I'm an American, originally from Palestine. And I have a question to Dr. Engle. Do you see a perfect storm being formed where you have on your chart, you see a lot of volatility, which tends to indicate risk? So you might have banks, for example, and people hoarding their cash and not spending it. You've got commodity prices falling down all across the board. Do you think that all of these measures could lead to deflation? And if it does, what kind of effects will deflation have on the global economy? Thank you.
Well, I think deflation is a concern. I don't think it's a perfect storm in the sense that these are coincidences. I think that they're all related. I think that the commodity prices are falling because we are forecasting a global recession. And this forecast of a global recession is driving the stock market down, it's driving commodity prices down, and we're seeing the consumers who have lost money in their both housing and financial accounts, reducing their spending, and that further decreases the growth potential of the global economy. So what are the impacts of deflation? Deflation is a very difficult problem because it can't be solved by monetary policy. You can't lower interest rates below zero, and in fact I would say that the effectiveness of monetary policy has pretty much been used up thus far, at least in the U.S. Instead, the Fed has done lots of things to add liquidity to the system by guaranteeing bank loans and providing cash in return for collateral that is actually not very liquid. So that's one thing that can be done to even in a deflationary environment. But I think the most important thing is that fiscal policy has been in the background, and I think it's going to have to come to the foreground for not only the U.S. but for economies around the world to invest in providing jobs and constructing, hopefully, projects which have long-run value to these economies, like infrastructure and productivity improvements, like schools, like apparently one thing might be to put broadband in a much wider range of locations. So these kinds of investments by the government would generate jobs and increase productivity in the future when the recession is over. And I think that's the best way to combat this kind of deflationary tendency.
Thank you. Would you like to try again?